Catus. Maximus here, this time with a quick review of these Craftsman vintage piston ring compressors. And these things are some of the nicer ones that I've really seen, to tell you the truth. Ended up getting a couple of these, both a 3-inch range and a 4-inch range. So this would be around 2.5 to 3.5 inches. This will do 3.5 to 4.5 inches. So most of the common sizes for gasoline and diesel engines. And these always were the really nice ones because they have these spring steel straps. They are riveted. This is a slightly newer one, and it doesn't actually have Craftsman. I'm not sure who originally made these. These are not Lyle's or anything like that, but maybe one of my viewers can tell me who did make these. The more vintage style, or the slightly older Craftsman branded one, does have a little bit nicer of a lever, but it could only be driven from one direction. This is the direction that it's intended for. Where on this one, the more updated one, it can be driven from either side. And a couple of things: don't ever buy these types of tools, piston ring compressors, if they're rusted. If they're rusted, you just don't want to deal with it, and the rust will basically ruins them. So you always have to get them when they're really nice and clean, and you have to get a oily rag and keep them very well oiled. Spray everything down. These are one of the tools that you really need to basically always keep wet with oil because you don't want any rust scratching the piston that you're putting in. So these things are pretty simple. When they're tight, you don't want to just release it and let it snap back, because that can snap the spring steel. These are spring steel, so it's very hard, but just really, these are beautifully made. They're offset just so you have some extra clearance. You can get the piston in there nice and easy. And these are much better to use than like the spring clamp. Gear Wrench has some spring clamp piston ring compressors. These are much better because you cinch them down, then you set it right on top, and then you tap the piston through, and you just have plenty of space to keep everything nice and square. These are handy. They have these couple little lips just to give them a little bit more surface area so it sits flat and to prevent this band from wanting to slide off. And of course, usually with these things, you only ever really use just a 1/4-inch splitter handle, or at most, a little ratchet. But don't get in there with something long like this. You'll just end up over torquing these. Don't use too big of a compressor on too small of a size, because it can cause it to want to kink. You really do need to get the right size range, but it's real simple. You just get a piston and you slowly work it in through the top of the compressor. And as you're manually just pressing in the piston rings, or you just open it up wide enough so you can just pass it through, get it in there, and make sure everything's nice and square. And then you would just ratchet up until you feel that it just is getting tight, and it tends to stop right there, and you don't want to go any tighter than that. This is not a piston, so if you were using a piston, you would wrench it down till you would not see any air gap. You would really kind of crunch it. I don't know how tight I have to make it on this roll of tape, but there wouldn't be any gap, and you would look around. The second thing to note is there's a split in those piston rings, so usually the oil rings are oriented opposite of the compression rings, or they flip back and forth, so you do want them sideways. You just don't want any of the piston ring gaps right here where the seam is. And then once you have that done, you just take and tap, and push the piston right through. And so that's why these bands are on the lower portion, is to make sure it really stays in tight and in control when you're actually pushing the piston out. If I can get it's actually pretty tight. It's a nice compressor. You can also make crinkly rolls of tape nice and round. It's actually surprising. That worked pretty well. Anyway, the only other thing to note is you don't want to just release this and let this thing unwind really fast, because that snapping action can break the band. So you want to hold on to it when you release it, and then slowly let it go. And that's how you want to store these, is you want to store them loose. You don't want to store them with tension on the bands, otherwise it tends to not want to expand to its intended sizing. So just some notes I knew about piston ring compressors, and wanted to share what a couple of actual really nice piston ring compressors look like. And these Craftsmans are actually one of the better tools out there for this job. Surprisingly enough, these are easily as nice as any of the other professional grade ones. I don't know who made these, but they really are beautiful piston ring compressors. And I think the smaller one, this is a 4716. I'm not sure what the part number is on this, that should be of note is this is one of the few Craftsman tools, but there is no part number on it, so a little bit odd. But I've seen quite a few of these piston ring compressors, and of all the auto stores and stuff I've been in, none of them really are quite as nice as these. Anyway, just wanted to share that with you all. I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.